corruption, greed. It's a mad world out there, and some have sought to take advantage of it. Desperately desiring material things, real men in history have admitted to signing away their souls in exchange for vast wealth, amazing talents, and even supernatural powers. But is it worth it? And is any of it true? Be careful who you strike a deal with and what you offer up in the exchange. These are the stories of real men who met the devil. Have you ever heard of a Faustian bargain or a deal with the devil? It's real, but as the saying goes, you can't get something for nothing. I looked back into history to find real accounts of men who made deals with the devil, and the final list I came up with will shock you. Kings, occultists, desperate musicians, and even religious men have played chess with the devil and lost. You may have seen lists like this before, but I guarantee I found accounts of historical figures you've never heard of before, so make sure to keep watching. Johan Goric Faust lived at the height of the High Renaissance, and he's the reason you've heard of a Faustian bargain or deal with the devil, because his life became a thing of legend. Why? Reading horoscopes and performing magic tricks might just be to make money, but Faust started traveling around southern Germany, gaining fame and claiming he was a physician, an alchemist, and an adept black magician. But where was his initial success coming from? The story goes that Faust went to a crossroads and made a deal with the demon Mephistopheles to get unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures. For that, he exchanged his soul. Faust bragged that he used his powers to gain victories over entire nations. When the ruler of Germany wanted victory in Italy, Faust said that he magically intervened. When Faust wanted to antagonize a chaplain, he told him to put arsenic on his face to get rid of his stubble. Yeah, that went well. And get this, Faust also traveled with a dog who was said to sometimes transform into his assistant. And if this is true, this next historical information I found is going to make this even weirder. In the same time period, news was spreading of demon familiars, which were animals that the devil gave to witches. You can decide for yourself whether you think this is true or not, but these low-ranking demons would appear as a dog, cat, toad, or insect. How these familiars survived is even more bizarre, but hang on, I'll get into that later. In his lifetime, Faust supposedly wrote magical texts or grimoires, and it's possible his originals are still secreted away, being used only by those still seeking after occult secrets. And speaking of occult secrets, have you heard that alcohol is called spirits for a reason? But what about drugs? Did you know the discoverer of LSD said he encountered the devil? The Swiss chemist Albert Hoffman wrote a book called LSD, My Problem Child, and told of a terrifying experience with a demon. Hoffman perceived a real, imperceptible, sinister, omnipresent being was with him. He challenged it to open combat, but the devil's voice taunted him that it was only the projection of evil in himself. Quote, "A demon had invaded me, had taken possession of my body, mind, and soul. I jumped up and screamed, trying to free myself from him, but then sank down again and lay helpless on the sofa. The substance with which I had wanted to experiment had vanquished me. It was the demon that scornfully triumphed over my will." Unquote. But was this just one bad trip?
You took too much, man. You took too much.
Hoffman tried for years to understand the chemicals he was working with and found that his experience was a pattern. Quote, "Both the estrangement from the environment and the estrangement from one's individual body, as well as the feeling of an alien being, a demon, seizing possession of oneself, are features of LSD inebriation that, in spite of all other diversity and variability of the experience, are cited in most research reports. I've already described my possession by the LSD demon as an uncanny experience during my first planned self-experiment. Anxiety and terror then affected me especially strongly, because at that time I had no way of knowing that the demon would once again release the victim, me." But was Albert Hoffman's interest just wanting to get high or to do science for fun? There were way more serious implications here. The CIA began a secret project called MK Ultra in the 1950s. They wanted to create a mind-controlled drug that could be weaponized against its enemies, and LSD was just the thing they needed. The CIA bought the world's entire supply of LSD for $240 grand and took it to the United States. Then, using fake institutions, they spread it around to hospitals, clinics, and prisons so that they would research it for them. You know the crime boss, Whitey Bulger? He was one of the people they experimented on in prison, giving him LSD every single day. He heard voices and thought he was going insane. Did Whitey Bulger encounter the LSD demon like Albert Hoffman did? Making success off organized crime and violence, maybe Whitey had to pay up in the end. His eyes were nearly gouged out by the mafia hitman who ended up slowly murdering him in prison. We're not sure about Whitey, but one man whose story is more certain is one of the most well-known because it changed the face of the blues industry entirely. Robert Johnson was bad at singing, bad at guitar, apparently talentless, but he desperately wanted to be great, like the other blues singers down in Mississippi. After disappearing for a number of months, he suddenly turned back up to play his old haunts. Performers like Willie Brown and Son House said he used to sound so terrible, people would practically beg him to stop. But when Johnson reappeared, suddenly, people went from wanting to throw up to those same crowds cheering his name. All of a sudden, he was an incredible blues player, possibly the best one who had ever lived. But how in the world did that happen? Everyone who knew Robert Johnson personally says that he went down to where highways 49 and 61 crossed, and he made a crossroads deal with the devil, trading his soul for fantastic musical abilities, the likes of which no one had ever seen. Some musical historians think Johnson is the whole reason rock and roll came into being. The greatest blues players of the time all knew him and said Johnson was upfront about his deal. He didn't even have to practice. He just sat down and knew how to play the songs automatically. Johnson's song lyrics and titles admit to walking side by side with the devil. But what's the price for such unnatural talent and fame? Johnson was the first member of the 27 Club, which is a strange pattern of celebrities dying at the age of 27, giving rise to all manner of conspiracies. What's interesting about Johnson's story is that he's admired for it. Keith Richards and Eric Clapton called him the greatest singer, writer, and player of all time. Richards actually thought Johnson was 2 or 3 guitar players when he first heard him, and stars like Clapton and Bob Dylan also covered Johnson's Crossroad Blues song. Then there's Jimi Hendrix, who was also inspired by Robert Johnson and who died at 27. Even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame talks about Johnson's demonic deal. You know what else is weird? There's a modern movie about Johnson's life with Ralph Macchio and Joe Seneca in the 80s.
Somewhere around here, there's a real special place. A crossroads. You know the language I'm talking.
But what really happened to Robert Johnson? I guess the devil went down to Georgia and then hooked a left and headed to Mississippi. Or maybe he headed over to England, where the occultist Alistair Crowley was trying to summon the devil and cast spells. Crowley even owned a house on Loch Ness. Alistair Crowley spent his adult life trying to cast magic spells and channel other beings. He turned his body over to external forces and somehow thought he could control it. Yeah, sure. Crowley channeled an entity called Lamb, which he illustrated. I'm getting vibes of coneheads or maybe big brain aliens from Star Trek personally.
The creature appears more adaptable than our specimens from other planets. We can soon begin the experiment.
Crowley also channeled the voice of an entity called Awas, and he did what that voice told him to do. You know, maybe listening to disembodied voices you don't know is a bad idea. Crowley had a famous quote, "Do what thou wilt," but maybe doing what you want all the time has repercussions. As the end of his life neared, it seemed like Crowley was starting to realize what he'd done with his life and where he was about to end up. Crowley's last words reportedly were, "I am perplexed and sometimes I hate myself," and he paced until he collapsed. I guess even this patron devil of rock and roll, as he's called, didn't want to die a slave to heroin and Satan. Maybe you'd heard of Alistair Crowley or Robert Johnson, but the account of Charles IX is something I have never seen anyone else talk about before in a list of men who met the devil. That's because I found part of the story buried in an old newspaper from the 1900s, and the rest from a book exposing witchcraft written in the 1500s. In a newspaper from 1906, I found an account of things Americans could do and see in Paris. One part really shocked me because it said, looking out from a cliff formed of glacial rocks, we saw a valley where 3,000 German soldiers were slaughtered while seeking to reach Paris. At one crossroads, there is erected a cross, and the legend is that here Charles IX met the devil one night. Whether he met the devil there or not may be open to question, but that he was intimately acquainted with devilish habits, no one can doubt, unquote. Another crossroads deal, devilish habits. What was going on in Paris? In 1580, a researcher named Jean Boden published a book called On the Demon Mania of Witches. Nice title. It became the leading authority on the truth about witchcraft and the most widely published work of the era on the subject. Boden uncovered how masters of diabolical arts claimed that their magic caused everything to unite. Via magic, they could use the stars and planets to attract demons, then angels, and lesser heavenly gods, and by these means, quote, attain God, whatever that means. What's strange is that the text alluded to each planet having its own demon associated with it that could possibly be called upon. But Boden saw that this really only attracted Satan himself.
Could it be Satan?
Magicians would wear the symbol of the planet they were interested in, forged with certain intentions or words. And what Boden revealed next was pretty wild. Quote, I wanted very much to point this out because I have seen great lords and even people of repute amuse themselves with such impieties. So Boden saw for himself some leaders in France dabbling in the occult, even giving to one of the greatest princes of Christendom, whom it is not necessary to name here. He's referring to a king here he doesn't want to name, can't imagine why. A golden image of Jupiter forged by theurgy or magic, which he wore to make himself greater, and which was found hanging around his neck after his wretched death. This king wore an amulet with Jupiter symbolism on it, basically. Also, he maintained a Neapolitan witch, whom he called his keeper, with 1,200 pounds in wages. So he kept a witch on retainer. That's quite the freelancer there. So great lords of the time were using symbolism, astrology, and magic, and the whole purpose was to make themselves greater and manipulate things for selfish reasons. Now to me, it's not so much the words witch or white magic that matter, because people can call themselves whatever they want. What matters is what you're doing and why you're doing it. Boden never named who he was talking about, but historians are pretty sure it referred to King Charles IX of France, who died in 1574 in his early 20s. He was said to have died mad. Boden insisted it was the result of the king having dabbled in magic and failing to punish the witches and magicians spreading their influence in France at the time. What was the deal with Charles IX? I can't tell you, but I can say it's awfully fishy that in my research I found 1, an account of Charles learning more about witchcraft publicly from a sorcerer, 2, Charles wearing occult symbols to get things he desired, and 3, even an exact location where Charles supposedly made a deal with the devil. Is that why he died so young before he made it to even 25? It's hard to tell when someone's success is because of their own good fortune or because they took a shortcut with dark means. Maybe that's what happens when you're at a crossroads in your life and you're faced with the choice of which direction to turn. Maybe it also literally happens at a crossroads like it did for Faust, Robert Johnson, and Charles IX, who made a crossroads deal with the devil. The question is, what direction will you go at your crossroads? It's awfully tempting to take the easy way out, but as history has shown, you can't cheat the devil when you've signed away your soul. What do you think? Have you heard of other tales of men who met the devil and want us to do another episode on them? Want more info on occult, bizarre, and out-of-this-world encounters? With that, I'll leave you with some of the best resources for even more interesting information. Check out the longer conversational episodes where the Metaphysical podcast dived into the details of the law of attraction, Atlantis, Lemuria and Mu, Saturn symbolism, and so much more. Also, if you like this type of content, please consider supporting my work by pledging on our website, themetaphysical.tv. With your support, we can give you more exclusive content and products. If you're into merch, check out the awesome t-shirts designed by yours truly by visiting the link in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel grow, and leave a comment because I love hearing from you guys. With that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.